Just so that you all know and our internet audience knows, if ever you want to see the wisdom lesson again, or see it for the first time if you're listening to us online, you can always go to our church's website, click on the sermon tab, and the entire manuscript is there for preachers all over the world to copy and use. The intensity of our recent political campaign has spawned, beyond a lot of hand-wringing and shouting, of which there's been quite a bit, but it's also spawned some new phrases that have found common usage in the media. It's now common to hear people say that we are living in a post-truth or post-fact era. Mika Brzezinski, disgusted with the way that Vice President-elect Mike Pence kept going on TV to say that Donald Trump did not say what we had all heard him say the day before, she started calling that pensing. Pensing is when you insist that what you heard with both your good ears, you did not actually hear. But he wasn't the only Trump surrogate that kept trying to walk back, obfuscate, and deny what their candidate had tweeted in the middle of the night before, or said very clearly in front of cheering crowds. Propaganda is not always a bad thing. I would even say that most of the canonical Gospels in the New Testament are, in a very real way, propaganda. The Gospels tell a story about Jesus that's not all historical. It's very laudatory. Sometimes the Gospel writers might use some historical facts, but more often they are massaging the narrative to make a point, to persuade readers to become a part of the Jesus movement. We more often think of propaganda as being used by the Nazis under the direction of Joseph Goebbels, that used prejudice, conspiracy theories, and outright lies in order to maintain power. From the West, we've often viewed the propaganda of the Soviet Union, Communist China, with absolute disbelief. As a kid growing up, we were occasionally treated to what kind of ridiculous lies that the Soviet Union was telling its people, and that they were gullible enough to fall for it. Blaise Pascal once said that truth itself is so obscure and falsehood is so well established that unless we love the truth, we cannot know it. Our environment is full of propaganda and lies, manipulation, and misinformation. If you want to know the truth, you have to want it badly enough to dig for it, to look for it, to work for it. There is, of course, no such thing as absolutely objective truth. There's no such thing as pure news. I tend to remember Walter Cronkite coming closer to that than what we get out of the 24-hour news cycle, but there never was a time that a journalist could be relied upon to give you just unvarnished facts. Not even encyclopedias do that. There's always interpretation. We can come close, but all of reality is interpreted through the lens of somebody's experience. It's influenced by our senses and by our instincts. A propagandist, like the writers of the Gospels, are not necessarily trying to deceive. They're not trying to trick you. They are trying to convey a truth that they believe to be true. And they're trying to convey it with such enthusiasm that their exaggeration and overstatement is just a part of their way of trying to convey the truth. We wish that they had been more concerned with facts. I mean, there's stuff we'd like to know. We wish that they had cared more about facts than about persuasion. But I think we can all understand why they did what they did. When, however, the governor of Michigan, Rick Snyder, tells the parents living in Flint, Michigan, that their water is now safe and they don't have to be afraid to let their children bathe in it or drink it, then we have propaganda of another sort. It was Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley billionaire, who said rather prophetically the week before the election that the problem during this campaign was that the media took Trump at his word, literally, but they didn't take him seriously, whereas voters took him seriously, but never really took him literally. We're being told that much of what Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Ben Carson, General James Mathis, and certainly Kellyanne Conway say, that what they say publicly cannot be taken literally, which makes me wonder why anybody listens to them. But big news today is that Bristol Palin's pregnant again. How's that news? How is anything about the Palin family news? But you know, we keep being fed things that pass for news, and they keep talking about people that clearly ought to be ignored. Though the impression that politicians lie has been part of public speech forever. I mean, you read Will Rogers, you read Mark Twain. We've always known that politicians exaggerate, lie, tell people what they want to hear. But I cannot recall a time in my life, which now spans some 6 decades, in which deception was used in rapid fire, just lots of lies real fast, in order to drown out anyone that's trying to say a word of truth. At first, I thought it was just Kellyanne Conway that did that, but it seemed to be a technique employed by most of the Trump campaign surrogates. They must have had a training session somewhere about how all you do when you're being challenged is to start talking faster and changing the subject and piling on more and more and more deception. They just deceived the public. And you would see the hosts of some of these shows looking absolutely confused about, I don't even know where to start to unravel this mess. I mean, it was like trying to pull a single twig out of a bird's nest. It was so woven with deception. I've never seen speed lying as a technique before, but it appears to not only be in use, but it may become the official presidential policy in our post-truth era. There's been a lot of talk recently about the influence of fake news on the recent election and on public opinion. The issue especially comes to a head in Donald Trump's newly appointed National Security Advisor, retired Army Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, whose gullibility for conspiracy theories, hate speech, and fake news is legendary. Flynn had worked in the intelligence department in the Obama administration, but was fired after 2 years because the intelligence he passed along was so often clearly not true. And not just not true, but was outrageously and obviously false. But he didn't seem to be able to filter it out. The question that I believe is relevant to ask here is why? Why do some highly educated, professionally experienced, and even highly placed intelligence officials believe things that are clearly not true? Why, when 98% of environmental scientists agree that our planet's climate is dangerously and rapidly being altered by the use of fossil fuels, are there so many elected officials who just swear it isn't true, or who insist upon acting like scientists are divided? I mean, if you have 98 scientists saying A and 2 that say B, and you find out that those 2 are being paid to say B, science is not divided. Science is united on this front. And you can certainly ask of the same question of most religious people in the world. Why do most religious people hold on to beliefs that are clearly contradicted by all of the evidence they have ever seen in their lives? Why do they hold on to it? Now, the reasons are not simple, and I don't want to say that it's just one thing when there are clearly lots of reasons. One of the things that makes people vulnerable to conspiracy theories and fake news is, and forgive me for being quite so flat-footed about it, but a whole lot of people in our experience suffer from a paranoid personality disorder. This is true for liberals and conservatives, because I've written liberal ethics columns for the local newspaper for upwards of 20 years. And because of that, I've attracted a lot of people who, though they were liberals, were also paranoid. They may be attracted to me because I published an article before the invasion of Iraq that said there are no weapons of mass destruction, this is a fake war. But then after they've come to church for a couple of weeks, they want me to preach a sermon about how the CIA is putting mind control drugs in the jet stream or the chemtrails following jets flying overhead. People who suffer from paranoia need to believe that they are right about everything, and that people who disagree with them are not only wrong, but they are so wrong that they are evil. So a lot of the extremity that we hear in conspiracy theories from both the left and the right have a great deal to do with mental illness. And in such cases, logical argument not only is not effective, it oftentimes is simply provocative. You will make someone really angry by confronting their paranoid delusions, and they will double down and become stronger in their insistence on them. Poking a stick at someone who's paranoid doesn't help. Some of you right now are remembering someone in your family that you just spent Thanksgiving dinner with. And I'd like to encourage you to just leave that behind and let's move on. And sincerely, I don't want to make light of any mental illness. I mean, it's a huge issue. It's a serious form of suffering. And paranoia isolates people. Paranoia destroys families. I'm just not sympathetic enough with the mental illness to say that it's okay to have a security national advisor who suffers from it. I don't think that we should have so much compassion about mental illness that we give someone the keys to either the Pentagon or the Oval Office who clearly suffers from paranoia.
Amen.
Beyond mental health issues, there are character issues. And what I mean is, people often believe what is clearly not true because they want to, because the lie serves their personal interest. I do not believe for a moment that the Koch brothers actually dispute climate science. They just publicly reject scientific fact because they have become unspeakably rich through fossil fuels. And they are willing, apparently, to completely make this planet uninhabitable if for 1 or 2 or 3 generations their family continues to become fabulously wealthy. People believe oftentimes that their own religion is right and all others are wrong because they believe that their religion validates their race, their lifestyle, their preferred form of government, and their religion holds out the promise of a piece of that pie in the sky just for themselves. They often refuse to examine their religious beliefs because their religious beliefs serve their own interest. They're not as interested in the truth as they are interested in making sure that their own nest is feathered. No thinking person, that isn't everybody, but no thinking person could critically look at the beliefs of the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormon Church, or for that matter, fundamentalist Christian churches, or even the Catholic Church. No one could critically look at those beliefs and continue to be a JW or a Mormon or an evangelical or a Catholic. Just in the news today, Pope Francis was quoted as saying that it's not acceptable to be gay and be a priest. And I'm like, has the Pope not met any priests? I mean, conservatively, 75% of Roman Catholic priests are gay. So you can whistle in the graveyard all you want to, but the truth is that being gay is almost a precursor to becoming a Catholic priest. It just is the way the church has been run for centuries. But for people to be critical thinkers, to be educated, and to continue to be a member of a religious cult that condemns women or gays or blacks or whatever your particular religious affectation asks you to condemn, to be a thinking, educated person and stay in that, you have to make the decision that your bond, your identity to that group is stronger than your love and commitment to reality and honesty. Still, there are many who believe fake news simply because they are gullible. And folks, hysteria is more entertaining than facts. I mean, if The 24-hour news cycle just read to us fact, 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 fact. Nobody would watch it. It went from reporting news to commentary because hysteria is entertaining. The mere fact that Fox News is often dispensed through extremely beautiful blonde women or sneering, condescending men with a tone of anger that can make D and F grade students feel superior to the A and B students that they always were looked down on when they were kids. When their politicians tell them lies that they want to hear, and their favorite fake news channel tells them lies that they want to hear, and then on Sundays they go to a church where they are told lies that they want to hear, then you can end up with a majority of the public that is wholly uninformed, who can be manipulated through fear and propaganda, and where people are terrified of Muslim extremists, when Muslim extremists most years will kill 7, 8, or 9 people. Do you know we have more than 30,000 Americans dying every year of heroin overdoses? Do you know that prescription pain relievers are the gateway to heroin, and we're doing almost nothing to limit the distribution of the Oxycontins and the other drugs that simply addict a patient and then make them turn to heroin? I did a funeral just a week ago for a 40-year-old woman that went straight down that path from pain reliever addiction to heroin, and it's almost not mentioned in the news. Heroin poses more than 100 times as much threat to the safety and life of Americans as Al-Qaeda and ISIS combined. And yet what do we talk about? Evil is always other rather than evil being next door to you, where someone you love and care about is in the process of killing themselves with heroin. Now, our wisdom lesson today is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who 50 years ago was bemoaning the fact that our education system was failing on 2 fronts. The first being that it was failing to teach people how to think critically. And if that was true 50 years ago, it's much more true now. Really a huge problem. To be able to sift through all the media and religious teaching and political input that we receive, and to be able to tell what is true and what is fake news. One of the goals of becoming educated is not just to get a better job or to make more money, but to be able to think, and to think clearly and critically. The other failure of education, King says, is that even when we do teach scientific and objective facts, we are failing to teach character. That is, some of the worst monsters of history were very intelligent, very educated people who used their intellect, their availability to information to do horrible things. It is not enough to simply teach people to think critically if we do not also teach them to love the truth, to prefer truth over falsehood. In a time when so many of us are exposed to hundreds of messages every day through social media, how can you tell what is true and what is false? And I'm going to tell you, I'm guilty. If I agree with it, it looks true. If I don't agree with it, it looks false. And I got to tell you, that's not a good filter. Some of the most important truths for us to learn are the ones we don't agree with. But most of our fact-checking comes right out of our own gut. If it makes me feel good, then I'll repost it. I like it. It makes sense to me. It agrees with my predispositions. When we do that, we have to face the fact that there's a character issue at stake. When presented with evidence that challenges our beliefs, a person of character will feel cognitive dissonance. It will be upsetting to be told something that you didn't know was true. Recently, at work at Harmony House, I was told that bleach only works to sterilize things in cool water. That if you put it in really hot water, bleach stops doing what it's supposed to do. I didn't know that. Some of you are shaking your heads like you've known that for, nobody told me. And now I discover this is true. Now, Because I'm interested in using bleach to sterilize things, I accept that I need to use it in cool or tepid water and not put it in hot water. But if I were being dogmatic, if I were a fundamentalist, I would say, no, my mother used it in very hot water and my mother couldn't possibly have been wrong and I'm going to keep using it in hot water. But if you strive to be a person of character, when you are presented with evidence that contradicts your previously held position, you should immediately feel some cognitive dissonance. Doesn't mean you change on a dime all the time. People don't change much and they don't change easily. But you should at least feel the dissonance that makes you want to investigate, to look at it again, to love the truth more than you love your own prejudices. There were always Americans around who knew that it was wrong to kill the Indians. There were always Americans around who wrote, preached, spoke about the fact that it was wrong to capture Africans and enslave them. There were always men in America who knew that it was wrong to deny women the right to vote. There are men and women in Congress and the Senate today who have repeatedly voted against gay rights, against equal pay for women, against universal health care, and have voted against a living wage, who continue to deny the validity of climate science, who know that what they are doing is wrong. They know it. They know the truth. They know the facts. But they do the wrong thing time after time after time, not out of a lack of information, not because they're not all PhD scientists, but because they lack character. Admittedly, some of them, particularly our congressmen, that may be an IQ issue there, but in a lot of cases, they know what they're doing is wrong, but they do the wrong thing over and over and over again. George Orwell said that in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. Now, you may not see yourselves as being a revolutionary, but in the face of the challenges that we have facing our country and the world today, at this juncture of history, I'm going to tell you pastorally, and I'm telling myself at the same time, we need to stop whining and get busy starting the revolution. Thank you. If I give you a minute, Mel, do you have an amen in you? Amen. Thank you. All right. There's a little aphasic after the stroke, but if you just don't go too fast, we'll get to it. If our nation starts registering Muslims, then I'm going to join the local Islamic prayer house and I'm going to be registered as a Muslim. If Trump administration just yesterday asked for the names of EPA employees who have attended climate change conferences, then I'm going to do everything I can to protect those people and to continue to insist in the face of climate science deniers that they need to put the truth above profits. Orwell said that truth becomes treason in an empire of lies. The sobering reality I think we have to face is that we now live in an empire of lies. And that requires us to become people of character, people of conscience, who have the courage to repeatedly commit the treason of telling the truth, no matter what the consequences. Vive la révolution. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.